Let's begin with Margot Robbie. By the way, Monopoly movie. They have been trying to make this thing for a long time because I remember 15 years ago, Ridley Scott was signed on to direct this.
Really?
He was going to give it like a futuristic Blade Runner style sheen. I mean, it was all about greed. Exactly. You can imagine it. Anyway, but they have been trying to get off the ground for a long time. And Hasbro, who have had other properties that they have made, Battleship, they did.
I saw Battleships.
I've seen that.
With Jesse Plemons.
Yeah.
Rihanna is in it.
Rihanna, yeah.
Yeah. And in the end, they do sort of blow up warships by saying A4,
Yeah.
B7.
It's an alien invasion, I believe.
Yes,
As
that's
I
right,
recall,
isn't it?
I've seen it once. But I would describe it as, sorry for this one, miss.
Yes.
I'm afraid it was a miss. But that sort of told its own story of where that came. Maybe it came too soon because that was released the same day as the first Avengers movie.
Oh, was it?
So,
How funny.
yeah,
God, that's a sliding doors moment for
Yeah,
our
a bit
culture.
of a sliding doors moment. But anyway, Margot Robbie, she's got this thing. It's interesting. I've heard her talk about this sort of stuff before. One of her sort of most early kind of eye-catching roles was she was Tonya Harding in that movie, I, Tonya.
Yes.
I think she felt like sort of a lot of people know who Tonya Harding is and they might have very strong views one way or another. She's not really that bothered. She's got a real eye for these kind of discourse dominators, if I can say. Again, she said about Barbie, everyone knows who Barbie is. You may not like her, but you know who it is. And I suppose in a way that's the same with this IP. And when we talk about IP, sorry to be super basic people, we talk about intellectual property, and a huge number of movies are now based it's really interesting. If you look at the top movies of the decade, top 50 movies, there's about 3 that are not based on existing IP.
So a Marvel comic would be IP,
Yeah.
a book would be IP, a
toy
board game
would be
would be IP, exactly. So
one of the movies I'm telling you about there is Elvis. That's not existing IP, but in a way it's kind of like it's a biopic. I mean, to some extent, to me, that feels slightly existing IP. It's interesting what's happened. We'll use the example of Barbie because I suppose that's obviously the most runaway success, and it's kind of weird, and that tells its own story. It's a weird movie about a toy that was kind of quite mainstream. Margot Robbie went there. You go to the Barbie headquarters. They show you, there's a special sort of, Mattel have got this place and they give you this brand immersion. And there's one guy who serves as a kind of Willy Wonka type figure and shows you all the way around. And there are, cultural exhibits about what Barbie means or what Hot Wheels means or what, by the way, Hot Wheels. Don't laugh because J.J. Abrams has signed on for that.
Oh, by the
Lena
way,
Dunham's
I'm
Polly
in.
Pocket. These are all things that are actually happening. Lena Dunham's Polly Pocket movie, that's happening. There's a Magic 8 Ball movie.
Wow.
There's a Viewmaster movie in development. There's an Uno movie. Vin Diesel is doing Rock'em Sock'em. Yeah, Uno. But if they can do Monopoly, they can do Uno. Rock'em Sock'em Robots, Vin Diesel is doing.
Is that the one where you punch and then their heads go up?
I assume.
Is that
It's not a toy I had, so I don't know that one. Barney the Purple Dinosaur, Daniel Kaluuya's doing. I mean,
whoa.
Greta Gerwig's agent said, and I think this is quite a good quote, so I'm going to read the whole thing out. Is it a great thing that our great creative actors and filmmakers live in a world where you can only take giant swings around consumer content and mass-produced products? I don't know, but it is the business. I think that tells you where we are. I mean, I find it quite depressing that these sort of toy movies, it's just another form of franchise. First of all, it's existing IP. They are there to shift plastic, let's be honest. Mattel's, I don't know, I think it pushed up their sales, but they probably make I think they made 1.5 billion off Barbie merchandise a year. And they love these kind of movies that are what they call toyetic, which means...
Toyetic?
Toyetic, it's a sort of rather grim word used in the industry, which means it's got these inbuilt merchandising opportunities. And basically, they want to sell you toys. So for all Greta's interest and Margot's interesting messages via Barbie, I still could never get over the fact that this is a movie in the service of toy IP. And actually, the toy companies are now saying, oh, people are coming to us wanting to tell their stories now. And I was thinking, yeah, I know where they are. They're trying to sneak a story that they want to tell, thinking, can I sort of reconstitute this around the Uno cards?
Yes.
And tell the tale I want to tell, because the reason people love these kind of branded things is because they feel like, not half the marketing has been done for us because, I don't know, Barbie cost 145 million. They spent 150 million marketing that. But that's on Barbie, which everyone knows what this is. So marketing is hugely expensive. And this has become a sort of new way of doing it. People think, they've got an inbuilt affinity. They already know what this thing is. They like Hot Wheels as a kid. Maybe they'll see the movie by J.J. Abrams.
So if, for example, you are a writer and you've got an absolute passion piece for years and years, which is about the sensibility of animals and animal consciousness and the fact that in 50 years' time we'll go, how on earth did we treat animals in the way that we did? And they have an absolute equality to us. And I've got this movie about it. If you are that writer, the thing to do is go to the makers of Buckaroo.
Yeah.
And you think, here we go.
Yeah.
Now you've got a movie. But that's the interesting thing.
Why should it carry the bucket? Why? Why should it carry any of this?
Why are we overloading it with all of that stuff? And also, shouldn't we support it when it finally rebels?
Yes.
Instead of going, I can't believe I've lost, you should go, do you know what? Good for you. And the whole point of the game is just to wait until the donkey rebels and then support it.
We all back the donkey. We're waiting for it to happen anyway, aren't you? It's a slightly flawed game in some ways.
Let's do 20 minutes on Buckaroo, shall we?
I bet you've got a tight 20 days on Buckaroo.
Yeah. Listen, I could do the rest is Buckaroo. I could be doing this all year. But the fascinating thing, so here's the thing, and it's twofold. So Barbie comes out and it's a huge hit. And it's a huge hit for a number of reasons. It's a huge hit because Margot Robbie got involved and got Greta Gerwig involved. So that's an interesting creative sort of union there. It's interesting because it speaks to what it was to be a woman in the 20th century and what that means in the 21st century. So there's lots and lots to talk about and what Barbie represented when it came out and what it represents now. So it's a fascinating area. What it's not about is people want to see films about toys. Right? That is not what it is about. It's not people going, oh my God, there's a film about a toy. Great, I'll go and see that. Oh, there's another film about a toy, a Magic 8 Ball. I'll go and see that. But Hollywood immediately always take the wrong lessons from things. And we do in TV as well. Something's a hit. They go, it's based on IP of a toy. Let's do some films based on IP as a toy. Rather than thinking, oh, why don't we do like a load more female-centered films that are helmed and produced by women?
I agree with you.
Why don't we do things about toys? And if you're a creator in that world, it's not like everyone goes, oh, we agree with you. It's for the next 3 years, that's the only way we're going to be able to raise finance. Because the studios and the people around the studios are the only people who can get a movie off the ground. So whatever direction they are sailing in for the next 3 years, as creatives, you sort of have to get on board.
Yeah, as I say, I think it is very depressing. Having said that, the Lego movie was great.
Exactly.
I have seen quite a few of them now as a accompanying parent, and once we got through the the Ninjago, all the other ones, I was like, okay, I've seen the Lego Batman now, I've seen it now. But they want to build out franchises from all these things, and as we have discussed several times on this podcast, the story of the last however many years has been about trying to build out franchises so that every movie is either is a sort of prequel to the next movie or a sequel, and so everything can completely be built out. But all of that is to do with familiarity and affinity. I think there is something in people. People will go and see toy movies because of the toy.
Well, I'm from the world of television where familiarity is the key, and getting a second series, third series, fourth series. The second series of a quiz show is a sequel.
Yes.
To the first series. Television is completely built on sequels. The movie business has always been built on uniqueness and, what's the great auteur coming up with now and what's Coppola come up with now. And actually, television is...
That's a story.
Yes. Oh, isn't it just? Which I'm sure we'll cover at another point. His new movie, which sounds amazing. But TV has always been, you build on the same thing and you do another series and another series. And, like a Saturday Night Takeaway, which we're going to talk about in a bit. It's been going for 20 years. So every year a new series comes out. It's still Saturday Night Takeaway, but no one's going... oh, I can't believe that they're doing another Saturday Night Takeaway franchise. It's the same show. It's the repeatability. So I'm comfortable with there being 5 Mission Impossible movies and 6, 7, 8. I don't really mind that at all.
But there's nothing else. That's the trouble.
Yes,
there's
that's
nothing
the trouble.
else. It has eaten the whole of the rest of cinema, and there are no original films in the top 50 of the last decade. That's absolutely apart from Tenet and, as I say, Elvis. So, these are hardly any movies.
And
at
even
all.
Then, if you're Hollywood, they're going to go, okay, it has to be based on a toy, or it's got to have 5 letters in the title.
Yeah.
That's what people are really going to see at the moment. Exactly. But listen, next year when we co-write Buckaroo the movie, we'll, I'm sure, have a different opinion of it. When we make $4 billion from Buckaroo
the movie, we'll be much more relaxed about this whole trend.
Now, the interesting thing about Monopoly is there is actually an interesting film to be told about the actual creation of Monopoly. So the film, one assumes, will be about it'll be sort
rentier
of
capitalism,
but that is what the game is based on. So the story of the game is it was invented by a man called Charles Darrow in the early 30s after the Great Depression. He was a salesman down on his luck, and he came up with this thing, sold it to Parker Brothers, and made millions and millions and millions. First ever board game millionaire. But that's not where it comes from at all. He stole it. What it really comes from, there's a game, in 1905, a woman called Elizabeth McGee came up with this thing called the landlord game. And it was an attempt to show the evils of rentier capitalism, and it was an attempt to show that the most important thing in the world is to have a wealth tax and a property tax, which is very fashionable now as well. So she came up with this thing, the landlord game, essentially to prove the evils of capitalism. Okay, that's what the game was. And you can see, if you go online, you can see the original patent that she got in 1904. You can see the board.
Oh.
It's also one of the very first ever continuous boards, which is a board where you go all the way around the outside and then you go back round again, which is quite a new thing. Now, it sort of fell out of favour, but a few people had played it, and a few college professors took it up and started using it in economics lectures to show, because it was a beautiful illustration of what is wrong with putting the wealth in the hands of landlords and taking it from renters. And over the years, people started making their own boards, and at Princeton they were playing it, and at Atlantic City they were playing it, which is where the big Monopoly board is. So they were playing it. They had these versions. Charles Darrow goes around to a neighbour's house who play their version of this game that's been passed down the generations from Elizabeth McGee. He, the next day, rings them and said, could you type out all the rules to that game that you showed me?
What a rat.
Yeah. And they were like, okay, we'll type it out. They typed it out, by the way, with spelling mistakes that are still in the version of Monopoly which came out. Okay, so he took it to Parker Brothers. To be fair, he also created his own boards. He created a lot of the symbols we see now. He did a lot of graphic work on it, but it wasn't his. It came from Elizabeth McGee from 1904, a woman talking about the evils of capitalism, and suddenly this guy takes it over and sells it and makes $1 million from it. That's a movie, don't you think?
Incredible. What a great story. I'm afraid I did not know that, and I think that's... Did he add things like chance and community chest, or were those...
No, all of that was there. He did the logos for them and things like that.
Big deal.
I mean,
really?
Yeah. I mean,
poor Elizabeth.
The landlord game and the version of Monopoly we see now are quite different, but they were just over the years that it changed bit by bit by bit. But it all came from her original board game. I'd watch that.
The same lesson, yeah, absolutely, because the same lessons apply, and I suppose that's why all these companies have sort of felt. I know Mattel felt that when they're not plugged into the kind of status quo, then they become less relevant and they do less in sales. So they always want Barbie to be doing things that are related to her times, or even slightly ahead of her times. When they took Greta Gerwig around, they said, oh, look, Barbie went to space before most women in the US had a credit card and things like that. Hasbro, they want to become a pop culture company.
Yeah.
And this is why there are so many different versions of Monopoly that you see now. If you go in at any point, you'll see they've got a Game of Thrones Monopoly. They've got a Stranger Things Monopoly. They've got...
We had one with the kids. We had dogs Monopoly, which is really cute. Yeah, it's all different dogs in different breeds and it was
now
lovely.
There are so many just based on the TV show of the moment.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, we had nothing else.
Yeah. And
then now they've diversified into they just redo it almost every time something big becomes a hit.
Yeah, we had battleships on bits of paper that you had to go to shops and buy new bits of paper. Wouldn't have Rihanna in those days, did we?
No. Well, it would have been better than that movie.
So she's got the rights. They're going to put something together, and we'll keep an eye on that. But it feels like a lot of those Polly Pocket, Magic 8 Ball movies are going to fall by the wayside. But you can be sure one of them will be a hit.
The Polly Pocket movie is happening. I think Lily Collins is in it. Lena Dunham's written it and is probably directing it. I'm not sure. But it is extraordinary to have so many of the kind of best creators tied up in these kind of ridiculous IP movies, in my view, and that they're unable to get original work off the ground. And that's what it is. You can't get the financing.
That said, if Bob Iger is listening, we are absolutely on board for Buckaroo.
We're very much on board for Buckaroo. But even I have to say, think about Warner's. Even the same, David Zaslav got a huge kind of plaudits last year, the head of Warner Discovery, saying, why haven't we made a new Harry Potter movie in 15 years? And actually, I thought, well, hang on, haven't you? Because all of those Fantastic Beasts things, what he meant was, it's been... Actually, it wasn't even 15 years. It was like 13 years since the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Why aren't we just remaking it all over again? And now they're going to remake it as a TV series. But there is something about a culture that is just retreading things from really recent past. Having said that, people have always... Sorry, I don't know why I'm going off this tangent, but I have just remembered that the Warner's made the Maltese Falcons 3 times.
Oh, wow.
In 5 years. Ending with the Humphrey Bogart version. So, you know what? Maybe people have always been remaking things again and again. And then you get to the one and you think, oh, that was the movie you were trying to make.
People lose teeth talking like that. If you want to hang around, you'll be polite.
50s and 60s, you would in the top 10, you'd have the same song 3 times by completely different, because a song would come out and everyone go, okay, I'm going to do my version of that. Unchained Melody, I think was like 3 versions of the top 10. Anyway, listen, this time next year, we're going to have Guy Ritchie directing Scale Electrics, the movie. That's fine. I'm going to go talk to him about it.
Oh, Takeaway has finished. ITV's sort of big Saturday night show for this time of year, hosted by Ant Dec, who honestly you cannot find people to say a bad word about, I have to say.
You really can't.
It's-
They are adored by everyone inside the industry and outside the
Some of
industry.
the biggest bitches in showbiz will not say anything mean about them, which I find quite surprising, but there we are. There
I
it
know.
is.
You can prod and prod and prod,
You
but
can-
also
there's nothing.
like you
Nice
go
to runners.
Yeah, you go to the heads of any department and they'll all go, oh, yeah, no, they're great. They are absolutely great to work with. And I think that's part of the success of that show. When it started out, so it's 20 years ago now, Takeaway, it had no right to be a success, is the truth. They were sort of doing well. They'd done SMTV was the thing where we all went, oh, hold on, these guys are
Which
these guys
was
are
a
great.
Saturday morning show.
Yeah. Back in the day when we had
Yeah.
Saturday morning shows
Yeah.
with them and
Cat
Deely. And they'd done Friends Like These on BBC, which had gone for a couple of series. They'd done Pop Idol for a couple of series, then got
Yeah.
replaced by Kate Thornton. So Takeaway came out 20 years ago. First series, not a huge hit, is the truth. But I think you can kind of see that those guys are good at what they do. So they were given another chance and another chance. And it's turned into, I think, probably the best produced bit of Saturday night television imaginable. It's a show that's an absolute love letter to Saturday night, presented by two people who clearly were brought up watching Saturday night TV. I've spoken to lots and lots of people who've been involved in it this week and just sort of asked, what is it that they have and what is it that show has that has made it such an incredible success? And yeah, the first thing that you're right in saying is everybody loves them, and everyone loves them because they're incredibly collaborative.
Yeah.
The whole idea of the show, so Saturday Night Takeaway, I mean, it's a big variety show with Ant Dec at its heart. A variety show where, by the way, not presented by comedians, presented by television presenters. I mean, they are funnier than most comedians and their instincts are much better than most comedians, but that's not where they come from. They come from wanting to entertain a television audience. That's where they come from. But with any TV show, you have to have a hook, really. You can't just say, oh, no, it's going to be lots of bits put together. So Noel Edmonds, he's in a country house and people come into his house. So, okay, that's all the hook you need. And on this, it was win the ads.
Yeah.
And that was come up with...
you won the product, for listeners who don't know, you won the products that were being advertised in the commercial break of that show.
And so even then, you watch the last episode on Saturday night, it begins with the show that says, don't just watch the ads, win them. And it ended with, don't just watch the ads, win them. So whatever else goes on in between, that's the hammock that we are sitting in, is watch the ads. And that was come up with by a researcher, Denise Harrop, she's called. And that shows an environment where everyone's comfortable talking and everyone's comfortable listening. And wherever an idea comes from, that's the idea that you go with. And I think even sort of 2 weeks out, they didn't have the name Saturday Night Takeaway. I think it was called 2000 AD or something, or 2000 ad. There was some weird kind of...
Ant Dec, ads.
Yes, Ant Dec and ads. And so they were kind of, is this something? And there's a great producer called Leon Wild, who's still in the business now. He came up with Saturday Night Takeaway, which is perfect because people have a takeaway on a Saturday night and you're taking away the ads and it's on Saturday night. So you know exactly where you are. And I think the point of those two stories is the reason it's great is because it's collaborative, and the reason it's collaborative is because it's got two great hosts who understand that you're made better by brilliant people being around you. And one of those people will be Andy Milligan, who writes an awful lot. He's the sort of Eddie Braben to Ant Dec, Eddie Braben to Morecambe and Wise. He's there, and he writes with them. And I talked to Andy a bit. I talked to some of the producers, and they all said, I go to them with a joke. I go to them with an idea. They look at it. I have a list. They go down. They pick the one I knew was good, which, by the way, hosts never do.
Yeah.
Writers will take gags in and hosts will go down the list and you go, okay.
That's the one you want, is it?
That's the one you're going with. Right. They will pick the good idea. They will then sit down and make that idea better.
Yeah.
And that's a testament to great, if a presenter is also a producer and is also a comedian, then that's the joy. And you've got the two of them and they clearly love each other.
Is there something, though, and I'm not to introduce a down note into this, but there does feel something like the end of an era, not just the end of an era. And obviously, by the way, I should say that Ant Dec still have the two other biggest shows on ITV, which is they've got Britain's Got Talent and they've got I'm a Celeb.
Absolutely.
And they've got also the Limitless Win, which is their own format, which is not one of the biggest shows on ITV, but which is their own format.
Yeah.
But isn't there something end of an era about this, about Saturday night shows? And, I've talked to people in the business this weekend also, and people were saying in the last 10 years, 10 years ago, this show got 10 million.
Yeah. And
now it gets 4.5, 5 if you're very lucky. And that Saturday night has become that. These shows are very expensive, about £1 million an episode. And these kind of shiny floor shows, really the remainders are Britain's Got Talent and Strictly.
Yep.
But otherwise, it's very, very hard, and these shows don't work anymore. And they're just even big buzz shows that you're seeing. And I know it's not a Saturday night show, but even a show that gets like a massive buzz and feels like it's got a huge purchase on the discourse, if I can use that word semi-ironically, Traitors, that
Yep.
gets like 4.5.
Yep.
And it's very, very difficult in this, and it's all come from streaming. And it's really interesting talking to people about the ITV Saturday night schedule and
Yeah.
what works. What do you do anymore? Do you have and someone described it to me as like, we have one main course, and
Yeah.
you're just trying to get this thing, and that's something like the 9:30, 10 o'clock slot. They have tried so many different things in that, and they just do not what they don't know what to. They've tried drama in it, hard dramas. They've tried funny things. They've tried all sorts of things, and lots of things just don't work. They must have tried 6 different ideas. It's hard to make Saturday night work now. And some people, I've spoke to a couple of people about this actually, and both of them said, I almost feel that there needs to be some kind of genre reinvention, as happened. And one of them compared it to what he called the Lambertization, after Stephen Lambert, of Channel 4, back in the sort of heyday when all these kind of formatted factual shows came out.
Wife Swap,
Wife
Faking
Swap.
It.
Brilliant. Yeah. Wife Swap, Faking It, Super Nanny, all that sort of thing. And it was a sort of it was a bit of a mashup of genres, and you weren't quite sure what you're watching, but it was really fresh and was and both the people I spoke to this weekend thought, I wonder, just something almost needs to happen on a Saturday night that's like that, where people are like, hang on, what is this? But I'm into it. Do you feel that, or do you feel that such a thing doesn't exist and that we're just chasing a past that isn't going to come back?
I would say, with all due respect to the people you spoke to, that's a sort of a view from 5 years ago, I would say, which is Saturday night is dead. Like, we can't do anything on Saturday night anymore. That family audience is absolutely gone. We're never going to. We might as well give up on Saturday nights. Why do we think it's any more significant? It's not more significant in most countries. American TV, Saturday night TV is not a thing.
No.
It's in Australia, Saturday night TV is not a thing. So it's only in Britain. And so people had thought those days when we could get 15 million are gone. But we've got to the stage now, we've got to that post-streaming malaise now, where we were constantly thinking, we're only getting 5 million for this. I think there is now an attitude in the television industry, in the linear television industry, that goes, hold on a minute, we are getting 5 million people to watch this. The Ant Dec thing last night peaked at 5.6, I think. That, in any of the streamers, in any bit of our culture we have, is an unbelievably huge number. It's an insane number of people, and I think we're making our bed differently and saying, actually, if we can get 4, 5, 6 million, this is amazing. And occasionally Strictly will hit 10, and I'm a Celeb will hit 9, but it's an extraordinary number of people. Now, ITV had these juggernauts for years and years on Saturday night that looked absolutely impregnable. It had X Factor and Ant Dec and all this kind of stuff. And X Factor, of course, has completely disappeared, and now Ant Dec has gone as well. The thing you wouldn't have guessed 5 years ago is that BBC would have such a resurgence on a Saturday night. The Wheel is a huge show. Bring Back Gladiators, that's a huge show. ITV have got the 1% Club, which is a huge show.
Well.
So what they're doing now, they are taking big comedians and giving them old formats, and people love that. So Romesh does The Weakest Link, Michael McIntyre does a new format, The Wheel, Lee Mack doing 1% Club, and it's really a shot in the arm for that Saturday night, because Saturday night really was in the doldrums. 3 years ago or so, really in the doldrums. Your friends are right in that saying we can't afford to fund this at 5 million because they're very expensive. But I think there's a sensibility that says if we can get 4, 5, 6 million on a Saturday night, that's an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
And so can we find formats that we can fund to do that? 1% Club is not as expensive as Saturday Night Takeaway, and the ratings are almost on a level with it. It's a huge hit. The Wheel is not as expensive as Saturday Night Takeaway, and it can get 5 million. Blankety Blank with Bradley Walsh, that's not a super expensive show to make, and it's getting 4.5 million. And I think we've got to the stage on Saturday night where people are saying 4.5 million people.
It's great.
Is a lot of people. And I think 3 or 4 years ago, we were saying 4.5 million people is a disaster. And now I think, it seems to me from talking to lots of people in the industry, we're working out that actually we can build an industry on something that pulls in such an enormous amount of it. And we're going to have to.
Yeah.
Because the days of, I did Confessions with Simon Mayo. We got 10 million.
Yeah.
And it's like, which is great.
Yeah.
But it's probably not going to happen again now. But you know, Ant and Dec are still going to be a staple of Saturday nights, I think, and you know, everything they do. They're just kind of a joy to watch, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Completely. And as I say, they've still got the other two bigger shows on ITV.
First time I came across them, I used to write in my very early days in television. I wrote with David Williams, as he is now. And there's a lovely man at children's BBC at the time called Chris Pilkington, who's a proper
Oh, yeah.
old school BBC exec, and was lovely. And Biker Grove had just finished. And he said, I think there's something in these boys, Ant and Dec. I think I'm gonna give them a show. And it was called the Ant and Dec Show on children's BBC. And Chris said to me and David, would you go up and have a meeting with these boys? And I'm like, okay. So we went up on the train to Newcastle and met them. And we must have been 22, and they must have been 17, something like that. And you just sat with them for half an hour. I think, oh my God, you are great.
Yeah.
You know, if you're any sort of a writer and you find a performer who's really got chops, you're like, oh, I can just go away and just write this forever. Now, it turned out I couldn't do that show, but David could. So David wrote for them for like 3 years. He was their kind of head writer on that show, and it won BAFTAs and all sorts of things like that. But yeah, from that day onwards, you just think, well, I think that you can do anything. Even just back then, you could see the way they were sort of bouncing off each other. You thought, I mean, you've got a whole career ahead of you in this. I wouldn't have predicted that David would be on the Britain's Got Talent judging panel when they were hosting it.
No.
I mean, that would have been a different one. Exactly. But and that's the other thing. Sometimes when with David's books, and people say, "Oh, do you know? Oh, I've heard he doesn't write them." I think, well, I'll tell you this for nothing. He's always was an unbelievable writer. I mean, brilliant, and for kids as well. Just absolutely. The second he's in with Ant and Dec, just the stuff he would pitch, you just go, "Oh, well, kids are going to go absolutely crazy for this." So in a way, you could have predicted the success of all of them in a way. But yeah, it's amazing from that day that their career is, with a few little bumps in the road, has just gone stratospheric. And as you say, the key thing is, I've yet to meet a single person who has a bad thing to say about them in any way whatsoever. And that's real testament to them. There's another couple of heroes who should be mentioned. I think the first couple of series, it took a while to find its feet. There's a producer called Ed Forsdick, who is no longer with us, Ed. And he, I think, was the person who just said, okay, I'm going to just take this by the neck and just really kind of just absolutely kind of format it and streamline it. And he did, and he worked with them for many, many years. I think he has a lot to do with the success of it. And I know the producers now are brilliant as well, but Andy Milligan as well, who writes with them. But what a amazing 20 years. If you started watching that show when you were 6 years old, you are now 26, and it's been absolutely a part of your life and will be a part of your life forever. And Ant and Dec understand that. And that's why they make television. They make it for families, and they make it for people, and they make it for memories. And that, I think, is their great gift, is understanding who is behind the camera. I have a story about Chris Pilkington, who ran children's TV at Endemol for years, Chris. He was the loveliest man, but always in a blazer, Chris. Glasses, blazer, very, very proper. And we had a company called Zeppotron with Charlie Brooker and all those boys. And Chris had said, I'd like to have a meeting with you. So I just wonder if there's anything you can do in the kids' TV area. And they were, yeah, of course. So they were super cool, all those boys. And so they're sitting in the room waiting for Chris, and he's a bit late. And he comes in 5 minutes late, and like harried, and he just goes, oh my God, I'm so sorry I'm late. Those at CBeebies. So there you go. That's kids' TV for you. But anyway, listen, let's raise a glass to Ant and Dec. And what an incredible...
Raising my coffee mug to Ant and Dec.
To Ant and Dec. 20 years of genius. I look forward to many, many more.
Now let us talk about some very interesting research, which I believe might be exclusive to us.
It is, yeah. Well, there's a wonderful lobbying group, pressure group, More in Common, who do wonderful stuff. And they're very good with focus groups and polling. And they're very good at telling us what people actually think rather than what we think they think.
Yeah.
One of the guys, there's a guy called Luke Trill. He's a very lovely, very talented man. He was talking about the polling they do. So every year they do this, at the end of the year, they do their kind of who are you voting for poll. And at the end of last year, Labour had a 15-point lead, right? So I'm chatting to him about that. He said, oh, by the way, when we do that poll, we also there's a question sort of underneath, which is about what TV shows do you watch? He said, would you be interested in that data? And I said,
what?
Take a wild guess as to whether I'd be interested in that data, Luke. And so he's given me the whole data. So it's a huge poll, and it's voting intentions, and then what TV shows watch. So we can watch which shows swing to Labour, which shows swing to the Tories, which shows have changed much, because he's also given me all the data from 2019
Oh, fascinating.
for the 2019 election, and so we can see which shows have lost Tory support, which shows have gained Labour support.
And so, to be clear, they did this poll at a time where, according to their kind of poll of polls, Labour were 15 points ahead.
15 points
so
ahead.
if
yeah.
there's a TV show at which Labour are kind of 15 points ahead in the breakdown of viewers, then it's kind of tracking the general
It's tracking the general
populace, as you
population.
would
And if
say.
it's above that, it skews Labour. And
Yeah.
if it's below that, it skews Tory.
Exactly.
I will say every single TV show in the poll, by the way, there is a Labour lead. Every single one, because that's where we are. But some that have a much smaller Labour lead. But there's some interesting
Dive me into the data right
stories
now.
in there. The TV show that skews most Labour of all the TV shows that they did, and there's all the big shows. Taskmaster. So it's they have a 41% lead amongst Taskmaster fans, the Labour Party.
The last time I'm going to do this, Labour had the 15% lead in the poll, so you can see what a big
Yeah,
skew
exactly.
that is.
So 26% more. It's also got the lowest voting intention for the Reform Party, Taskmaster, which is interesting. Other huge Labour leads, so ones where it's predominantly Labour people watching, RuPaul's Drag Race.
Yep.
And Big Brother.
Well, that's
another one.
that skews so much younger, so that's sort of to be expected. Tell me about E.g. Strictly.
See, now the big headline for this, I think, is in 2019, the Tories were winning amongst Strictly voters, and they were winning amongst I'm a Celeb voters. So in 2019, they led by 7% for I'm a Celeb voters, and they led by 21% amongst Strictly voters. So Strictly was very, very Tory, 21%. Now, and this is why Keir Starmer's going to win the election, forget the rest is politics, forget any of that stuff, forget what you're reading, forget Newsnight, forget Question Time. The reason Labour are going to win the election is in 2019, they were losing amongst I'm a Celeb viewers by 7%. They are now winning by 19%. And they were losing Strictly voters by 21%. They are now winning by 6%. So Labour have won Strictly, and
They've won
I'm a
Strictly,
Celeb.
but to be clear, that show is skewing much more Tory than the mainstream, as it were. 'Cause to me, in some ways,
Strictly,
this isn't really Strictly. Sorry, this isn't sort of in some ways about Labour and Tory shows. It's sort of about the mid-market, that kind of where the centre ground is. And something actually that is true, certainly about Strictly, and in some ways, harking back to a discussion we had just before the break, one of the reasons why it gets still very, very big viewers is because people in their 70s and 80s watch it. And you cannot have a Saturday night big hit without, and that's part of the reason why that is a very big hit, because they're at home and they will watch it, and they will watch TV on linear on Saturday night. So you would expect it does skew older, and you would expect it maybe to skew Tory. Clarkson's Farm.
Yeah, well, Clarkson's Farm, which you would think would be classic Tory heartland territory, that's had the biggest swing of any show since 2019.
That is the absolute fulcrum of it, though, isn't
Yeah.
it? That, by the way, that show should be on terrestrial. If that show was on terrestrial, it'd be one of the biggest shows on television by a long, long way. I mean, it would be a massive.
Well, it's a great. Well, they're stopping it now, of course.
I know.
Yeah, it's a great show, but yeah, that's the show that swung the most to the Labour Party since 2019. If you were to pick one television show that absolutely matches the general polling of this country, so is absolutely on the money politically to how we are as a country, do you know what that show is?
Is it I'm a Celeb?
No, it's going to really annoy people. It's Question Time.
Is it?
Yeah, Question Time is almost exactly matches the figure for every single party.
Despite the fact that BBC get lambasted the entire time for the way they've handled it. I have to say, though, that things that generally track, and I think this is really interesting, give or take a couple of percentage points either way, are I'm a Celeb, Planet Earth, Corrie, Clarkson's Farm, Happy Valley, Bake Off, and the Women's World Cup. Now, I think that's really interesting, and this is a lot of the story of the centre ground and the way that the centre ground moves. This is a bit of a side note, and I'm just putting it in because it makes me laugh. But you know, Michael Ashcroft, Lord Ashcroft, who does the polling, he always asks what he calls a daft but revealing question. And so these things about TV shows are really sort of a fascinating way to look into politics. He did one recently saying, if they were a sweet treat, who would the leaders be? And I won't bore you with it. But someone said about Rishi Sunak, this is in a polling group, a normal person who's come and done a focus group. just as a normal person employed in some industry or another, and then we'll say, Rishi Sunak, they said he'd be a Milky Way. It's all right, fairly generic. It's okay in the celebrations, but would you buy it? Probably not. Now, the way people talk about politics via those kind of prisms is so interesting, and it's such a sort of like, what would Keir Starmer be? He'd be an Easter egg because it's hollow inside. The way people they're so much better than newspaper columnists. The way they talk about all of these things is really, really interesting. And when they're asked to analogize is where I think you get the most kind of telling insights into politics. And to some extent, what we were saying about these TV shows, that's the same. Another thing I would say about this is this really harks back to that conversation we were having a couple of weeks ago when Tim Davie did a speech about the future of the BBC. Television is a unifier in our country, and these big shows, all on terrestrial TV, are able to find some kind of middle ground. Now, this is not the case in America, which is a very polarized. Television was the great unifier in the 20th century in America. Everyone, they watched I Love Lucy on it, they watched the moon landings on it, whatever it was. In a geographically vast nation, it brought people together. But back in 2016, when people were analysing the post-election result, they found that if you were trying to guess how Trump did somewhere, it was far more accurate to discover how popular the show Duck Dynasty was there than how people have voted for George W. Bush. That is extraordinary. And if you didn't know Duck Dynasty, it was like a sort of cable show about this family who made those duck calls, for duck hunting, like a sort of whistle. I've seen a couple of episodes.
That's why I voted Trump.
Yeah. And then there were these other stories, Modern Family, people would say, oh, this is an amazing show. It's a network comedy, but it's very, very modern. There's a gay couple who's got a daughter. It's a blended family in lots of different ways. But actually, when you looked at where that show was popular, it is popular in liberal urban areas. And they don't have those unifying things, which we have. We talk a lot about our rural and our metropolitan divides, and we kind of overplay it to some extent in this country because people everywhere watch lots of these shows, and they are terrestrial things, and they come together. Another thing that I felt after the 2016 election, I remember watching John Oliver last week tonight, and it's a brilliant show in millions of ways. But the first show after the 2016 election was kind of post-apocalyptic. He sort of blew up the year. There was a sort of detonation. And I remember thinking, oh, I see. You literally don't think anyone who doesn't agree with you anymore watches these shows. Now, late night didn't used to be like that. You look at Letterman, Late Night, all those things. People of all different political persuasions watched those people and were brought together by them. But this isn't the case in their TV market any longer. And yet again, we're talking about a polarized market over there. Even in entertainment, these are essentially entertainment shows.
Yes,
they're not kind of political shows, and they're not the news channels. But these shows have far more potential to bring people together, and they track centre grounds, and their popularity is evenly dispersed. I mean, obviously, as you say, things like RuPaul's Drag Race or whatever it is, Big Brother, that might go young, urban, whatever. But in general, the big shows are watched all over the country.
And it's fascinating, that thing about soft power as well. I do think the Strictly thing is very, very interesting because, as it does slightly skew Tory. It's still more Labour people watch it because more Labour people are watching everything at the moment, but it slightly skews Tory. And it's such an incredibly socially liberal show, Strictly, and it tells us a very interesting story about ourselves as a country, and it tells us a really interesting story about diversity, and we're constantly told that go woke, go broke, and we're constantly told that people don't want certain things shoved down their throat. This is a big show that is Tory skewing and that tells extraordinary stories, and yet its popularity maintains and goes up and up and up. And in terms of the battle for hearts and minds, and in terms of how you change a country and how you change people's thoughts and how you change people's feelings, Strictly does that in a way that's far more powerful than almost anything else we have in this country. Strictly is telling a story, and it is not putting off viewers, and it's not putting off viewers who vote Tories, because a lot of Tories are very socially liberal, and it's an enormous success, and it's showing a generation a different sort of Britain, and it's just series by series helping them accept what that is, and it's doing it in a way that it doesn't lose a single viewer as it puts people on. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, and again, a testament to the power of TV. And I do think there's something to be taken from it, because I do think, and I've always thought, as in my life as a TV producer, if you can do a show that gets 15 million viewers, then that's essentially how you win an election, is to get 15 million voters. And obviously it doesn't completely correlate, but there's something to be said for people who genuinely understand how to bring people together, what it is they understand. If you're Ant Dec's producer, Diego Rincon, who makes Takeaway, he understands how to get a huge amount of people to like the same thing.
Yeah.
And Talk to
He
him.
understands a lot better than people in many of the party headquarters.
Yeah.
For definite.
Get him in.
And I'll tell you what, a show that will be really influential in the election, I think, and that is Mr. Bates. Now, do you know, last week, because Alan Bates, on whose story it was based, was in the inquiry, the director of programmes at ITV, Kevin Ligo, thought, just put it back on the front of ITVX so that when you go to the home screen, you can... Now, on that same day, another 250,000 people watched it. This thing is now way over 15 million. It's by far the biggest show of the year. And that, I think, is going to make a massive difference in the election. Who would have thought? But that will make a difference. It will make a big difference, I think, to the Liberal Democrats, because I think it's going to get a bit hairy for Ed Davey when he comes to the inquiry. And I think that's extraordinary that something like that can make a difference.
Yeah, it's one of the few industries that has the same numbers as politics, television. So I do think this, listen, you can read far too much into it, but it's fascinating research. Thank you to More in Common, and thank you to Luke Trill there as well. But I do think the fact that you've lost I'm a Celeb and Strictly tells you all you need to know about what's going to happen in the next election. And just a couple of other little things. So they chop it down into even smaller groups. So he talks about progressive activists. That's what we would say Corbynistas, that sort of group. So on the left, progressive, very, very active. Their favourite shows, Doctor Who, Blue Planet and Question Time. They love that. Backbone Tories, that's the sort of right-wing version of that, so that the sort of harder right. And their favourite shows were the Rugby World Cup, the Coronation, fair enough, but also the women's football.
Fancy.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it? And the Red Wall voters, loyal nationals, they're the sort of people that gave the last election to the Tories, that kind of what they call the Red Wall, which is reductive, but we know what we're talking about when we say it. Their favourite shows, I'm a Celeb and Corrie, both of which have now turned Labour. And the Starmerites, this is if you want to talk about, that sort of middle ground thing, their favourite shows, Happy Valley, Strictly, Bake Off.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, listen, what do we draw from it? I don't know, but it feels like that's the next election right there. I wonder what Rory and Alistair would have to say about that, like they'd listen.
I don't know how many of those shows they would have seen, but I would have to hand over that baton to them to tell us.
Yeah, they just watch Bargain Hunt. I love that.
Never off it. I'd like to see them on Bargain Hunt.
Alistair and Rory?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that would be amazing. Yeah.
Appointment to view.
Let's make that happen for Children in Need.
Yeah.
Yeah, special guest director, Guy Ritchie. I could see Rory in a Guy Ritchie movie. Do you know what I mean? I could see him in The Gentleman, owning a big stately home, big cannabis farm. I'm not saying that Rory is a cannabis lord. I'm not saying he isn't, because I have no proof that he's not. I assume that he's not.
I can't see anybody in these films. Nobody exists as like the people who are in Guy Ritchie things. They're not about anyone that actually exists. They're about a sort of self-contained, weird, self-relating universe, which is non-authentic, but presumably very lucrative for Mr. Ritchie.
I knew we'd get back there somehow.
We'll get that there every week if we have to.
Gosh, that was an awful lot going on there, wasn't it?
We got through a lot there.
But also, you didn't seem ill at all.
Well, I feel I am coming down with something, but we'll see.
We'll see on Thursday how you are for the question and answer. That'll be something to look forward to. How ill will Marina be? See you on Thursday?
See you Thursday.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.